So I'm Sam Morgan. I'm the Chief Exec of Craft, which is based in Birmingham. We're, I suppose, a high-end, what some people classify as fine dining. We don't tend to call it that, but we call it more sort of fun dining. A sort of relaxed environment restaurant based in Birmingham city centre, adjacent to the International Convention Centre on the west side of Birmingham.
Sam, well, look, thank you for joining us for this chamber Q&A. And just to give viewers some context, so we're talking today on Friday, the 18th of September. I think that's important because this is now a week since the additional COVID measures were announced to take effect in Birmingham and Solihull. And after a little bit of confusion at the time, that was clarified that it meant that you couldn't have households mixing either at home or in gardens. And there was a question of, would that apply to the wider hospitality sector, to restaurants and pubs and bars? And it was clear that in the end that no, it wouldn't. That obviously took effect then from Tuesday this week. At the same time, nationally, on top of that, you've had the new rule of six introduced. So if you're going out and about, you can't be in a group of more than 6 people. Today, we've seen additional measures take effect, not here in Birmingham and Solihull, but in other parts of the country, in particular the northeast, which are actually a step further than those which currently are in place in Birmingham and Solihull, and include pubs and restaurants having a 10 p.m. curfew. And we're about to enter the next sort of cycle of review, which is being done largely on a weekly basis by government. And I suppose what we wanted to try to do was to make sense of what we know is a ever-changing and can be confusing situation, and try to draw out some views on what the impact is on the broader hospitality sector. And I know you've got some particular views as to steps that could be taken and you think would be a good way to provide, I guess, the best route through to enable hospitality businesses to keep trading and to sort of ride through this sort of coronavirus challenge, and make sure that we're still in one piece for when we do pass through and can start to rebuild effectively. So that's a big old preamble, but I mean, just give me your take, I guess, in general of what you've seen in the past week on your business.
Yeah, so obviously the rule of six was first announced by central government. We had to take some steps to sort of review the current position. I think luckily for us, this didn't have a significant impact, and in some ways it actually made it slightly easier. I mean, I'll give you an example. A table of 6 would book within Craft, especially from an indoor point of view. We used to have to clarify whether or not that booking was 1 or 2 households and not from multiple households. So when the rule changed to be the rule of 6 from multiple households, in some ways it actually made life slightly simpler from a clarity point of view for hospitality businesses. We simply know now that we cannot take a booking of any more than 6, regardless of how many households that might apply to. Of course, if there is a family of 7 that all live in one house, that's the only time that we really need to clarify that position. But given the nature of what Craft is as a business, it's very unlikely that we've received bookings like that. So in some ways, that ruling was at first, how is this going to impact us? But then on reflection, actually made our life a lot more simple to operate. Obviously, the more information that was cascaded out about that, the easier it became. We then had the local restrictions. We initially heard that hospitality wasn't involved. There was then a confusion about whether it is involved. We obviously welcomed the feedback that was given by Andy Street, Ian Ward, and also Justin Varney, who have all publicly said that the measures that are in place from the majority of the hospitality sector in Birmingham have been good, and the reported incidents around the spread of coronavirus have been predominantly singled towards people's households. That was, I suppose, not a pat on the back, but a sign of confidence towards the sector in this local area. And we felt reassured that the measures that we were putting in place at least have been recognised that they were effective. I think that the message that was cascaded out to the public was slightly bumpy on that subject area. I think there was a natural assumption from members of the public that they wouldn't be able to dine out in restaurants or, in multiple households still. And I can understand why the majority of the public reached that conclusion. We had to do a significant amount of work around assuring guests or future guests that they could still dine under the current new restrictions.
And Sam, did that have a direct effect, on the sort of the hours and days afterwards? So Friday night, Saturday, Sunday on the business.
Absolutely, there was 192 cancellations, what we classify as knee-jerk cancellations within 90 minutes of the announcement going out. These were cancellations that were done electronically that were beyond our control, rather than guests phoning up and requesting clarification. We've gone back over those cancellations, and I think the predominant thing that we see in the trend is actually now, although we've managed to assure them that actually they're not subject to the restrictions, I think the biggest implication has actually been around childcare. So many people now can't come out because the childcare options that were available to them are no longer available to them. And I think that's the biggest significant impacts on the hospitality sector as a result of the changes in the local restrictions.
Which is sort of with all of this, and we know it's so complex, but a sort of unintended consequence, isn't it? Because while the measures are focused on the household, because we know, infection rates have been predominantly in our region, at least, going up there. But as you say, if you can't get a babysitter or can't ask, a family member who isn't in your bubble to come over, then you're not going out, are you? And and the volume of cancellations there is really stark, and I suppose really shows the direct impact that all of these measures and how they're communicated is having on business.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it took me back to to March when the Prime Minister said, don't go to restaurants, don't go to pubs, and we're still open. We were open with no one in here. We had more staff than we had guests. So that was the initial worry. I think the difference was this time we managed to overcome that with decent sort of PR exercises, combined with the message that was being cascaded out, to the public. It managed to smooth that hump, in the road. And in turn, I suppose we've come through that situation now, and we're now proceeding through with the rule of six. And in addition to that, the additional guidelines that have been requested by Birmingham City Council to aid us ensuring that it continues to be safe, and even more safe than what the normal COVID secure guidelines say. So,
And that's, of course, about not just ensuring that it's safe, and also helping to build confidence amongst customers and staff as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a number of measures that we've got here in craft that don't form part of the government's strategy or the local strategy, that we think aid public confidence and also aid our staff's confidence. Because during a time like this, we concentrate predominantly on, do our guests feel secure, but also it's important to understand, do our staff feel secure? If our staff are here feeling secure and feeling like they want to be here, then naturally that installs confidence on our guests. If it's the role reversal and subsequently they don't feel secure, then why would our guests ever feel secure? And
it's not even that; it's also the experience, isn't it? Because if you are going out, then you still want that to be a great experience, and we'll take the measures, but you don't want to be somewhere feeling awkward.
No.
But I mean, as I say, neither of us have a crystal ball. I certainly don't. I don't know if you've got one there in the office, but what's your sense on what else could be done or would be tolerable, I guess, for the industry if additional measures do happen? So I mentioned we've heard today about what's happening in the northeast and sort of curfews and the like, and slightly stricter than we're having to operate now.
Yeah.
Would you sort of look at that and go, we absolutely want to avoid any further measures here? Or is it a case of, actually the right measures are applied, then which allow us to stay open and just to slightly adapt how we operate and trade, then absolutely bring it on, because that's more important?
I think there's two things to consider here. I think, first and foremost, I'm not from the hospitality sector. I know I own a hospitality business. It's not my primary trade. That's the trade of my wife and the other team that's here. But the way I look upon it is that the hospitality sector is bracketised too widely at the moment. We refer to the hospitality sector, but in my mind, that's broken down into 5 sectors. And each one of those sectors has a significant amount of nuances and complexity that's attached to it. I can speak from first-hand experience of owning craft, what measures we can put in here, which are very adaptable for us to be able to put in, but would restrict other businesses quite significantly. I think, however, we also need to consider that if we cannot put these measures in, then it will end up forcing the hand of the government to simply hit a blanket, you're closed, like they did in March. So I think that the measures that are being suggested are by no means going to be ideal. And, curfews at 10 o'clock is going to be extremely difficult for a number of venues. And first and foremost, everyone thinks about the nighttime type venues. But I could speak for a number of high-end venues that would also struggle. I mean, you could consider some of our Michelin star restaurants that, I'm sure are some of the safest to return to. They have the least amount of people in them generally, but they have the highest end of experience. They have very strict protocols on cleanliness and other aspects. But often an experience with them would last over 3 hours long.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult for their venue to close at 10 o'clock and for them to be able to still continue to deliver to a significant proportion enough people for them to stay afloat. Equally, on the flip side of that, if the other alternative is closure, is that better than closure? And the answer to that is probably yes. In the instance of ourselves, we don't do the tasting menu long experience. Ours is predominantly set menu 1 to 4 courses. And as a result, many people could dine with us within a 2-hour period. Could we adapt to a 10 o'clock curfew with relative ease? Yes, we probably could. Would it reduce our trade? Yes, it would. But would it reduce it significant enough for me to say I'll be better off closed? No, I wouldn't.
And I think that the point you made around, how everything can get lumped under the umbrella of the hospitality sector is so important, because, we're seeing that in the news and it gets bandied around, and it's lots of different industries and sectors. The same happens, and actually you've got to understand the detail. And when we're talking about measures which are impacting on businesses and livelihoods and and lives, it's really important that the detail is considered. I mean, how would you categorize then? I think you mentioned 5 different sort of elements. What would those be in your mind, just for those who are watching, to give them a sense?
So we have restaurants.
Yeah.
We have restaurants like Craft, like O'Fee, Adams, Burnell's, the higher end venues that are out there. We have pubs. I think we have nightclubs. So nighttime environments. I would also say, to a degree, some of the bars that predominantly trade from a nighttime point of view would start to breach into that area. The hotels are considered as part of the hospitality sector. Often we refer to it as hotels and hospitality. But they're also in there. You've also got establishments, takeaway, fast food establishments, be it Burger King, be it McDonald's. All of the nuances that come with those are significantly different. I said to someone, a customer here yesterday evening, I said, do you feel safer coming and sitting here and having a meal than you do your daily shopping at Tesco's? And she said, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
Yet the first people to get the beating stick is the hospitality sector.
Yeah.
And often enough, you'll see it on the news. They put the hospitality sector up there. They'll show some video footage from 2016 of people piled out on Broad Street. And that is the image that's portrayed to the wider public. And that creates an impression. It also creates a focus on the hospitality sector, as a whole, when really, if we started to look at those sectors as individual sectors in their own right, I think we would start to have a slightly different opinion. No different to when the lockdown was in place. We had retail and what we classified as retail stores of necessity that could stay open, and then retail stores of non-necessity that couldn't stay open. For instance, B&Q were fine to stay open, Tesco's was fine to stay open, but a friend of mine that owns a clothing store, he couldn't open. Now, that was because they recognised within retail that there were certain places that needed to stay open and then other places that didn't. Equally, in the hospitality sector, there's businesses that are higher risk than there is others. And I think that if we are starting to impose measures on businesses and on sectors, we have to start drilling down into what those sectors are to address the specific risk.
Yeah.
There's no risk of people in my venue congregating in groups around the bar and it spreading like wildfire, because we didn't do that before coronavirus. So we're definitely not going to be doing it during.
It's such a critical point, because, as you know, on the basis that we've got to get better at living with this, and certainly, you know, going into autumn and winter, and we all, you know the additional challenges that brings, normal coughs and sneezes and the like, and people aren't sure, and so it's going to have create lots of confusion. But we've got to, I suppose, from the point of view of the chamber and you know, businesses who we support and represent, is we need the detail in there, don't we? So that people, where you can trade, and you should be able to trade safely and effectively, and you can still go about running your business, that you are allowed to, and aren't sort of adversely affected by blanket legislation or rules where you're kind of going, this isn't fair. And it's that sense of fairness, I think, is one of the critical things. We all get what's going on and the need, I think, to be responsible, but we don't want it to be unfair in the imposition. I mean, Sam, just sort of, I guess, looking slightly further ahead as much as we can right now, I mean, do you sort of remain optimistic in the long term around, you know, Birmingham and, you know, the city, you know, even while we've been, you know, locked down, people have been, you know, in their homes, you know, the city centres continue to develop and evolve, and the progress that's been made around Centenary Square and Paradise and the like is fantastic. I've been sort of, you know, in and around the city centre this week, and then you see that, and you know, you can almost forget because it's been so long since so many people have. But what's your take on the sort of slightly longer term than you know, months and maybe years ahead?
Well, you know, I think most people will be able to tell by my, you know, dulcet tones, I'm not from the Midlands. I'm a Londoner that moved here in 2010. My wife's from the area. And I said back in April that the city that was going to suffer the most from a hospitality point of view was going to be the City of London. And that's because 76% of the hospitality trade that operates in London is from the tourist trade. So it's from people that do not live within London or within the vicinity of London. And that's why London is suffering so much. I was confident that Birmingham was going to be slightly different to that. I think that the tourist trade doesn't add a significant amount to the hospitality sector of Birmingham. I think that one area that suffered for hospitality is the corporate trade. A lot of restaurants like ourselves have been reliant on the corporate trade for some time, especially the lunchtime, you know, trade. We've returned significantly better than what I ever imagined. And I'm encouraged by that. I'm encouraged by the investment that's going into the city, and I'm encouraged by a number of aspects. One thing I do think that we have to do is we have to get a control of the way that we are conducting ourselves as a region in respect of, one, the virus, and two, you know, how we should start looking out for each other. And, you know, I think that if we can do that with the best intentions, and one of the things I've always said about, you know, when I moved here, is that I always felt welcomed, even though I was a Londoner and I was slightly outsider. And, you know, I live out in Worcestershire. I'm only 20 minutes into the city centre. I've always felt welcome here. I felt like it was my home from the beginning. And I feel like I'm an honorary Brummie as such. But I think that, you know, we need to look after each other's businesses. You know, we're a family business. Many of the restaurants in this city are independents, and we rely on them. We rely on the custom base of the local area. We rely on local people. But equally, we say to our guests, you know, come out if you feel safe to do so. if you're not feeling up for coming out, you know, because you're unwell, don't come out. You know, move your booking and come another time. You know, we'd much rather have you here feeling 100% than 80%. And I think that, you know, I understand that a lot of people are nervous. I understand that people are very apprehensive. I understand that that brings with it a wealth of sort of confusion, and, you know, confusing messages also don't help with that. But equally, I think if we all stick by each other and do the right thing, and I say that with the best intentions, not because, you know, it's written down in some contract somewhere, but just because it is the right thing to do, then we'll all come through it and out the other side. And I think that when that happens, we'll be able to all move forward. I think there is, however, an element at the moment where a proportion of society need to get on board with that. And I think if they do, then we'll be absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And, I spoke to the mayor on Friday, and, you know, I welcome the fact that he picked up the phone and rang me. You know, I didn't expect that under any circumstances. I dropped a note. He picked up the phone. They clarified the situation. Confusion happens during times like this. I get that. But if we could all stick together, business, the community, you know, politicians, you know, then we will come through it. But we need to understand what we're dealing with, and we need to have a little bit more of a heads up. Yeah. You know, I think at the moment, there's so many different messages. I think yesterday, you know, is it a whole national lockdown for months on end and we're not going to have Christmas? Now is it a lockdown for 2 weeks over the half-time period? There's so many different things being thrown around. Yeah. That for someone like me that's trying to protect my team, protect the business, protect the public, and all these different things, you know, I've got a law enforcement background. I used to be paid to protect people. When I suddenly owned a restaurant, I never thought for a second that was going to be part of my job, but it is now. Yeah. But equally, the only way I can do that is with an understanding about what's coming around the corner, and we need to know a bit more on that. I think
there's some very wise words there. You know, that communication, the clarity of communication is absolutely key. And I know at the chamber we'd sort of feel that as well, and that duty to try to get the right information over to businesses really, really simply, so they can do exactly what you said and make the decisions which are going to best support their business and everyone who works, you know, in that. And you know, I think, and as well, you know, Sam, you know, absolutely, we have all got to pull through this together. And, you know, it can sound a bit cheesy sometimes, can't it? But it's also very, very true. And you know, it was good to hear, you know, the positivity that business has bounced. You know, your business has bounced back better than you expected. And you know, and I think that, you know, it's important to try to hold on to that right now. We are going to enter, you know, a period where it's going to be fast moving, lots of change. But if we can pull together, get the messaging out, then we'll give ourselves, you know, the best chance of doing so in the best possible way. I must say as well, after 10 years here, I am detecting this first slight twangs of a Brummie accent there. So, you know, it's truly your new home now, Sam. So you should feel good about that. But Sam, look, thanks so much for joining us. As I say, I think it's a really interesting perspective, you know, from someone with, you know, your insights into, we'll call it the hospitality sector as a whole, but as you say, in particular, what you're doing with your business there. You mentioned Dr. Justin Varney as well as the Director of Public Health. Absolutely. In Birmingham, many people know, who's a great communicator, great source of information. He's actually joining us on Thursday, which will be this week by the time people are watching it, at 8 o'clock in the morning for an update. So there's a plug there if people want to join in and watch that. And other than that, Sam, I'm going to say thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me, and obviously the best of luck for everyone, and, you know, going forward for the next few months.